Okay, this is CD number 5, how to let your property quick time and stay the right side of the law. Right, there are 8 ways that I've learned over the time of owning low value, high yielding properties of getting them let. Now, before I get into that, the reason why it's so important to get your properties let quick time is not just because of the lost rent, that's obvious, but there are other things that come into play when a property is empty. Now, one of the things is that you're liable for council tax. So if the property you've got is furnished, which I recommend to always let unfurnished, but if you've got it furnished, the council tax bill starts immediately, so you get no exemption. So every time a tenant leaves, you're clobbered with roughly, depending on where you're at, you're clobbered with a bill of anywhere between £50 to £150 a month. So as it sits empty, not only you've got to pay the mortgage, you've got to pay the council tax. And also another thing is, if a property is empty and you've got buildings insurance on it, a property is uninsured after 30 days of it being empty. So you've got to check your policies. Now, there are some policies that keep the property insured after the 30 days, but to comply with that you need to basically check the property every 5th day. They put all these different kind of conditions once it's been empty beyond 30 days. It's quite difficult to keep it insured under their terms. So be aware that an empty property after 30 days, you're not covered for insurance, not even for fire, vandalism, etc. You know, as a property sits empty, kids get to know that the property is empty and it's liable to vandalism. And so I've had properties being broken into, graffitied. You know, the kids have just used it as somewhere to drink or get high or to do all sorts of things, and they're not actually really nicking anything, they're just using it as somewhere to hang out. Or you could get the scenario of theft, people stealing the boilers. So that is another reason to keep the property let. And also over the winter period, pipes are likely to burst, you know, and so if, for example, there's a leak in pipe, it never gets reported, it does more damage. So what starts off as just a leaking pipe or a burst pipe totally wrecks the ceiling, ruins the floor, ruins the flooring, and you know, you've got a massive bill. And if you're not insured as well and you don't discover the problem until a week after the burst, then it can be quite costly. So the idea is not to let your property sit empty for any long period of time, because the cost, not just the lost rent, but additional costs can run into the thousands. Okay, so the 8 ways I've identified letting a property quick time, and I suggest you do all of these things at the same time. So never think to yourself, oh, I'll try method 1 or method 2. Do all 8 at the same time, right? And the 8 things are: adverts in shop windows, flyers to neighbours, right to existing tenants, advertise in the window of the property, use a letting agent, use the internet, use the newspapers, and homeless units. So those 8 things you've got to do. So I'll get into them in detail. Right, shop windows. Now, I'm sure you've got a computer, so all you've got to do is print out an A4 piece of paper split into 8 sections with your property to let, 2-bedroom flat, £50 a week, or whatever you want to put on it, whatever the market rent you can get for it. I always put DSS welcome, deposit flexible, because that just gets the inquiries up and you can sound people out. But utilise the shop windows. Now, put them in places like Tesco's, Sainsbury's. You've got off licenses, you've got news agents, and they charge 50p a week, so it's a really cheap way of advertising. And if you've already got the advert already pre-cut out, you can do that, or they have cards that you can fill out your advert and put it on there. The next one is flyers to neighbours. So again, print out on your computer flat to let in the area. You don't have to put the exact address, but say, look, do you know someone who's looking to live in the area? And more than likely you're going to have people that live in the area know of other people that want to live in the area. They're not aware that your property is available for let. So if you drop these flyers, say you print up say 50 to 100 flyers and drop them in the surrounding area, and you never know, you're going to get some calls. We let a lot of difficult to let properties in the area, because if an area's got a bit of a reputation, most people are not going to want to live there, but the people that live in that area of that reputation are probably going to know people that want to live there, and they may even want to move from their current place into your place. So maybe because that, you know, they just prefer your location to where they currently are. It could be a bigger property. So it's not poaching in a way, but it's just letting people know that, hey, there's a property here to let and it's available in your area. So flyers to neighbours is another effective way. The third way is right to existing tenants. So if you've got tenants in that area, write to them directly. Now we write a letter to them saying, look, if you find a tenant for one of our properties, there's a £50 Argos voucher in it, and if they do find someone, and it does work, we've had a few tenants come through, our existing tenants, and we just go online, go to argos.co.uk and send them a £50 voucher. So your tenants can be a good resource of new tenants. The fourth thing you got to do is put an advert in the window of the actual property. So I tell my team to print 4 A4 pieces of paper that says property to let. You just put the number there and get people to use your advertising space wisely. You know, that window there is easy. It costs nothing to put a poster up to say, look, this property is to let. And you've got to be careful of vandalism, etc., you know, because you are advertising the property is empty. But if you're on the first floor, if it's a first floor flat, or it's a decent area, or you've got a neighbour that's looking out on the property, then it's not too bad. And you know, and even if the property is in poor condition, we sometimes put undergoing refurbishment and just contact us, and you know, ready soon, so you can build up a pipeline of tenants for your properties getting done up. Okay, the sixth method of finding tenants quickly is use a letting agent. Now, go to a letting agent that is only going to charge you on success. So you say, look, I've got this property, I just want tenant find only, how much do you charge? So they can do all the advertising. If they don't find a tenant, there's no cost, but if they do, they'll charge you, and the usual fee is up to 1 month's rent, but you can usually negotiate down if it's if you're in an expensive rental area. The sort of normal cost for a letting agent to find a tenant is about £200 to £300. I mean, we've got a deal with an agent that charges us £100, but they don't do the viewings, they get us the leads, and then if a tenant takes it, we pay them £100 success fee, and that works out quite well. But letting agents, they've got their own database of tenants that could be looking for a property like yours. Again, they get access to networks like Rightmove and Property Finder, and so they can get access to prospective tenants that you might not be able to, because you're not paying any kind of listing fees to Rightmove, etc. And that's the seventh way of finding tenants, is going through the internet. I mean, we've got a subscription to Property Finder and Find a Property. Now, Property Finder costs us £150 a month, so it may not be applicable to you if you're just starting out, but you can use Gumtree, which is gumtree.com, which is free to advertise. And you've got quite a few other places, like if you just type in Google houses to rent, there's probably loads of places that you can advertise for free, loot.com, AdTrader, etc. So the internet is a great free tool of getting your properties out there, but we've found the most effective internet advertising, apart from the subscription based ones like Property Finder, Rightmove and Find a Property, is Gumtree. So that's a fairly good one to use. And then the seventh way of finding tenants is newspapers, so properties to let. Now, it costs anywhere between £5 and £50 to put an ad, so keep the ads small, but they are effective because you've got people ready, and people are looking at in a newspaper are ready to move there and then. So I find it an effective way of advertising. I do newspapers as an additional to the rest of them when I need that boost. You know, if I'm struggling with inquiries, or we're getting inquiries but we're not getting the right sort of tenants, then a newspaper advert really gives it that kick to just get the number of inquiries, because all you're looking for is one tenant, and sometimes we have to show the property to 100 people before we find the right tenant. The right tenant being A, they've got a deposit, and B, they pass a credit check. And then the last method we use is we contact homeless units. So we write to the council and go, look, please pass this on to the homeless unit, we've got properties to let, we're very flexible, and what we usually find is that we will get tenants through, that they'll cover the deposit, they'll pay the rent direct to us because they're under the care of social services. So sometimes they can be dream tenants. They'll put a tenant in there, your tenancy agreement is direct with the council, they've got no problem paying you the rent religiously every month, and even if the tenant disappears, they still pay the rent. So homeless units can be a great source of tenants, and I mean, obviously you've got to match the property to the tenant, so I'm not saying give your best properties to the homeless unit, but if you follow my strategy of high yield, the higher the yield, the worse area the property is in. So you know, just bear that in mind, you're not going to get the best tenants. We've got a few homeless people that are our tenants, and they are alcoholics, and they do sometimes give my office grief, but nothing they can't handle. That's something that we're used to and we're trained in doing, but you'll just get used to it because the rewards are fantastic, because you're looking at getting LHA rates, which is the average rent that you can get for a property, for a below average property, so hence there's a decent profit margin there. So don't be scared of the sort of homeless, unemployed type lettings. And then regarding credit checking the tenants, we use a company called rentchecks.com. So it costs us something like £9.50 for a basic check, and that covers, you see where they've got CCJs, etc. Most people that we search haven't got jobs, but if you do want to do a higher grade check, there are ones where you can get the employer's reference, a landlord's reference, so, and that's about £15, so you can use that as a way of credit checking your tenants. Right, now this section is all about how to stay on the right side of the law when renting a property. Now the 4 things you need to be aware of when it comes to the law in dealing with property management is there's contractual law, there's regulatory law with regards to safety, there's tenant deposit scheme law, and then there's the licensing law. So starting off with the first one is contractual. Now the 2 people you're in contract with, the key 2 people that you're in contract with is your lender and your tenant. Now the first one is the lender. Now you'd have signed a mortgage offer accepting the terms of the offer, and pretty much what you have to do is just make sure you pay the mortgage on time and in full. If you do that, you'll never hear anything from your lender other than when there's interest rate changes and you get a mortgage statement. Other than that, you won't hear from them at all, and they don't want to hear from you as much as you don't want to hear from them. And the only time they might want to contact you is if they want you to borrow more money, but in the current climate that's looking the other way. It's funny that I've got quite a lot of mortgages with Mortgage Express, and they're writing to me asking me to remortgage elsewhere because they want the money back, but I'm not doing that because I've got fantastic mortgages with Mortgage Express. I'm on some great tracker rates, which means I pay hardly anything on my mortgages at the minute. So really, but if you keep paying your mortgage payment on time and in full, that's no problem, and you'll stay in the right side of the law then with your lender. The other key legal relationship you have is with your tenant. Now what binds you two together is called an assured short hold tenancy agreement. Now that comes with the pack on the data CD, and that pretty much sets out how you and your tenant are going to conduct yourselves, what responsibilities that you're going to put upon yourself and responsibilities that the tenant is obliged to follow, which includes paying the rent and looking after the property, and you repairing the property and keeping it to a good standard. So that's all supplied with, and read that through. If there's anything you feel uncomfortable with, just delete it. I mean, it's you can add and delete to that tenancy agreement as much as you want, because as long as the tenant knows what he's signing, which he should read the tenancy agreement, but you're both bound by what's in that agreement. Now the tenant is covered by the Housing Act, so you can't put in things like, if you stop paying the rent I've got the right to throw you out, because that would be against the Housing Act. But you can put reasonable clauses in there, and they'll just be subject to reasonableness tests if it was ever to come to court. Now also what I've included in the data CD is an eviction notice for section 21 and section 8. Now I've also included an eviction pack which guides you how to evict tenants if they don't pay the rent, but pretty much you just have to print out these notices, serve them in good time. So on a section 8, which you can use if they're not paying their rent, you can serve that one day after they're falling into arrears, and you've got to give them 14 days to leave the property. If they don't leave, then you give them another 14 days and say you're going to court, and then when you go to court you can have them out within a matter of weeks. It's as simple as that. And if they really refuse to leave, you can use a court bailiff. But that's all explained in the eviction pack, so you'll be able to download that in the propertyhotspots.net section of the site. So those are the key contractual relationships you have with your lender and your tenant. The second thing is regulatory law with regards to safety. So the key things that the law governs is gas, electric and fire. Now gas, you need a gas safety certificate. So if you've got gas appliances in the property, you need to get a gas safety certificate from what used to be called Corgi Register, but now it's called, the engineer's got to be part of the gas register, and he has to conduct that safety certificate, and you have to have one in force that covers a whole period of a year, and you need to present that to the tenant if they ask for it, and if they ask for it you need to provide that to the tenant within 28 days, otherwise you're committing an offence. Now gas is a very serious thing. People die from carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty boilers, so if in doubt, if you want to have a simpler life and not having to do this gas safety certificate, then you can rip all the gas appliances out and switch to electric heating. Some people do that. I've done that a few times, just because if the boiler's old and the cost of repair is prohibitive and it's just simpler to put electric heating in, then I will go for the electric, and that means you don't need the gas safety. So that's how you comply with the gas safety. Then the electric. Now, there's no requirement for the landlord to have an electrical safety certificate, but there is an obligation on the landlord to make sure that the property is safe. So there's a bit of a grey area. I mean, one way you can definitely make sure a property is safe with regards to electrics is to have a certificate, but you can just do visual inspections on the property to ensure that the property is safe. So as long as there's no loose wires hanging out, as long as the sockets are firmly in the wall, the light fixtures, the electric circuitry, the electric switches, as long as they look okay and there's no live wire, then the likelihood of your tenant suffering any damage or injury is fairly unlikely. So, and even if there was the scenario of someone electrocuting themselves, as long as you can say, yep, you did a visual inspection and you could see that the sockets were all on the wall, and if the tenant then electrocute themselves because they're trying to play around with a socket, you couldn't be held responsible. So just adopt a sensible attitude towards the electrical safety. But to cover yourself, if you wanted to get an electrical safety certificate, it has to be NIC EIC certified, and that will cover you. And I think if you did that once every 5 years, if you ever was to come to call, that should give you a fair bit of protection. And then the final one is fire. Now, if you furnish a property, which I don't recommend you should, but if you do furnish a property, as long as the furniture was bought after 1988, which I'd hope it would be, then you've got no issues of the furniture falling foul of the fire regs. And you'll be able to tell that because there's any piece of furniture that is made after 1988, which is to do with sofas, they will come with a fire logo. So just check that there's the label within the cushioning of the sofa and the beds to say that they conform with the fire regulations. So that's the regulatory side of the law with regarding to renting property. Now there's the tenant deposit scheme. Now this is a new thing that's coming. It's been going for about 2 years now, and it's there to protect tenants' deposits. So you've got the insurance one and the custodial. So the insurance one is where you can take the deposit and hold the deposit, but you have to pay an insurance fee, which is about £30 for the duration of the tenant being in the property, which means that if there's a dispute between you and the tenant, that insurance policy will cover the cost of handling the dispute. And I believe that you should follow the insurance backed one, because then you can keep hold of the deposit. And then they've got the custodial one, where you hand over the deposit to this third party, one of the deposit scheme providers. And so basically when the tenant wants to leave, you go back to the custodial scheme and you say, right, if the tenant, if you believe that you require some of that deposit, then you get into dispute with the tenant, and the custodial scheme will determine how much of the deposit you're allowed to get. Now I feel uncomfortable with that scheme, because I just think, well, possession is 9/10 of the law. I'm going to hold the deposit, and it requires the tenant to actually kick up a fuss, which if they've messed up your property, they're not going to try and dispute it. Whereas if they know that someone else holds your deposit, they'll just go back and say, yeah, I want my deposit back, and they'll kick up a fuss. So I would always opt for the insurance backed one. Just pay the policy and then keep hold of the deposit. And then the final thing with regards to keeping the right side of the law is licensing. Now there's two types of licensing. So in England and Wales, you need a license to rent what's called a HMO. Now a HMO is a property that is shared effectively. Now there are 2 or more households living in one property, then that is a HMO. So a household is pretty much a single person. So if you've got 2 people sharing a flat, that is a HMO. Now you might need licensing for that sort of property, but licensing is split into 2 sections. You've got mandatory licensing, which means if you've got a property that's 5 tenants or more on 3 stories, then you definitely need a license, and so you need to apply to the council. And failure to rent a property without a license is a criminal offence. And then you have what's called additional licensing, which means that in certain areas for certain councils they require you to have a license, just because the areas that particular area is a bit blighted due to HMOs being there, because they're like bedsit, it's like bed sits, and so you'd need to check with the council to see whether you need a license. So if you are going to embark on doing HMOs, which is housing multiple occupation, then as a rule I would just contact the council and say, look, this is the property, do I need a license, regardless of whether it's just 2 people sharing or 10 people sharing. It's just good practice just to cover yourself, and then you would obtain a license to be able to rent the properties out. And then in Scotland it's a different story. Everybody needs to be licensed. So for my properties in Scotland, I hold a license for each individual local authority to enable me to rent my properties out. And the key thing in obtaining a license with the council is the fit and proper test. Now you need to pass their test to deem you as a fit and proper person, and that's things like no criminal record, no contraventions with housing law, no violence. So anything, they're looking to see that you're not going to be a bad landlord. And so things like if you have been convicted of violence towards a tenant, then that's going to be bona fide evidence for them to refuse you a license. But the funny thing is, I read a lot on the council's websites, and they claim to have never ever refused anyone a license. So, and I'm sure there must be landlords that have got criminal records, and I hope they would have declared them, but then once they've declared them, they're still not refusing a license. So it's early days. I mean, the licensing thing's only been going for about 2 years, and we'll see how that all pans out. But you need to have a license, because if you are caught renting a property where you need a license, that's a criminal offence and a massive fine. So you don't want to go down that route. Okay, we'll move on to CD6. Now, if you need help building a property portfolio, just give us a call on 0870 990 3205. That's 0870 990 3205. Thanks.